Joining me is Shawn Langley, a new BibleMesh Research Fellow in philosophy. Great to get to know you, Shawn. And in this time, we're going to ask a bunch of questions, hear about you, where you're from, what you're doing, what your research interests are, and then I have a couple of other special questions in store. So first, tell me where you're from and where you live and what do you do?
Yeah, so I am originally from Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee my whole life. And I currently am in North Carolina. My wife is from North Carolina, so we have moved here recently, central North Carolina. And I am right now working at a small community college here in central North Carolina, doing some teaching and doing some other sort of administrative and academic uh, roles as well. Yeah, I'm very excited to be participating in this
Yeah,
opportunity.
you're also involved with one of our partner organizations, the Kirby Lang Center for Public Theology. Is that right? What do you do?
Yes.
What do you do for them?
Yeah, so I serve as a sort of an associate research fellow with Kirby Lang and do some periodic writing and reviewing for them, and also am involved in some of their research activities and things like that. Um, yeah, trying to get some other uh, activities with their research, especially with philosophy going as well. So
Right, excellent. And you've crossed disciplines as well, and with theology, you've been teaching in our MA in theology degree that we offer in partnership with Union Theological College, right?
yes, yeah, I've been really enjoying that. Yes, trying to uh, wed philosophy and theology as helpfully and carefully as possible. Yeah.
Good. Um, Tell me about your educational background. Where'd you go to school, and what'd you study?
Yeah, so I did some undergraduate work in Tennessee, my home state, and then I um, did my master's programs. I went to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, and focused there primarily on biblical studies and sort of theological method and exegetical theology. And then after that, I was sort of weighing the sort of the types of research I wanted to go into, and so it was very tough to choose a exact path, I guess. But for doctoral studies, I decided to move more into the philosophical theology world, and so I went to study with Craig Bartholomew at Trinity College, Bristol, and their partnership with the University of Aberdeen, and did my program there, writing broadly in epistemology and sort of epistemology and how it influences theological method, the way that we interpret the Bible, things like that, focusing on a couple of uh, thinkers in that tradition. Yeah.
Right. I can see the connection, but I'd love to hear you share briefly why you ended up where you did, where you went from doing a graduate degree with a focus in biblical studies to epistemology. What type of questions were you asking that led you in that direction, and why did you land where you did?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the motivation for the switch was as I was looking at biblical studies and thinking about the types of problems that I was encountering and that I guess had been prevalent for the within the tradition. Um, it just seemed like there were these discrepancies in how we actually approach what it means that we can uh, understand something in the first place, rather than coming to a particular passage or even really the Bible in general. As we approach the Bible, what does it mean that we can know God, know a personal God, know Christ? And all these questions, the debates, at least the debates that I was maybe more attuned to or interested in, they all seem to hover around these bigger questions of what it means to know God, or what it means to gain knowledge from God's word. They seem to be in the epistemological realm rather than just the some other realm. And yeah, I wanted to dig more into those questions and see what is it. Yeah, what are we even asking or debating when we're talking about what does this passage in particular mean, or what does it
Yeah.
mean for my life? Yeah.
Yeah. As evangelicals, we're people of the book by virtue of our inheritance of the Reformation, sola scriptura. But we often take for granted what it means to know God via that book, and maybe what it means to have knowledge at all, through reading it and interpreting it, and what the interpretive process takes into consideration. Just all these assumptions. So I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Looking at the types of things that are types of questions our culture is asking, the types of answers we give, whether it's evangelicals within this broader sea of secularity that the West is in, or our culture at large. What what are some things from your discipline, things that you're passionate about, that you think we ought to be looking more closely at, or that we need to give consideration to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about it a lot. Um, and I think sort of uh, two ways of answering it would be just in general. I would say sort of the role and the place of suffering in the Christian life and but in life in general. It's suffering and difficulty is such a um, uh, yeah, such a hard thing to process in general, but to think of how it might in some way contribute for good or bad to our development, our epistemological awareness of things is a really uh, interesting question, especially for Christians. So I would say that sort of a potentially positive role of and not positive in the necessarily the sense of good, but positive more in the sense of active. Does suffering play some sort of active role in deepening our knowledge of life in general, of ourselves, and of God? Um, and then more specifically, maybe for Christians, would be just the role of or the place of epistemology, the place of our um, understanding uh, within maybe what we might call the means of grace, and what is it? What do those particular expressions or whatever perspective we might have on the means of grace, things like that? Um, what is it that they are doing in our minds? What are they invoking in us? How are they? We would agree they are drawing us closer to God, into a deeper understanding of God, prayer and understanding of the Bible, those things. But what is that process? And especially with all the disagreements among traditions, how can we sort of try to bridge some of those gaps and come to a better understanding of how they work?
So things like the ordinances, or the word preached,
Mhm.
prayer, things that we might, if we were Catholic, we would say have sacramental function, but as Protestants or evangelicals, we might say that they are chosen means by which God communicates to us. And you're asking what types of things, how do they form our knowledge of Him? What types of things do we come to know via those? And what does it even mean to be communicated for God to communicate Himself via those means of grace? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we would often you would we would agree and say, yeah, I think prayer is very important for my understanding of God, or
yeah,
the ordinances, as we would say. We would all agree these things are very important for the Christian life, but then examining a little more deeply how are they affecting us? What is it about them that
yeah,
um, sort of invokes this deeper understanding? Yeah.
yeah. I think for many, we're used to thinking in terms of they form us by affecting our hearts, or they result in virtuous moral action. We don't really think about how they form our minds for knowing God. And I think that's a great insight.
Yeah, and I think it helps to, in terms of the bridge, within multiple traditions and looking at different traditions, it seems that, traditions emphasize particular elements, whether it's a heavily liturgical type
Yeah.
of environment or a non-liturgical environment and things like that. And so kind of looking at, okay, what might a particular tradition be, what types of advantages might they have based on their tradition, and vice versa, what types of disadvantages might a particular tradition have based on how they approach these things.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of really interesting questions there. Yeah.
So we've been using this term a lot since we began this discussion, epistemology.
Yeah.
What's a brief definition? What is epistemology?
Yeah, I would say sort of the study of, or thinking well and carefully about what we understand, and sort of all that's involved in that. So how is it that we understand things? What are the implications of things that we do understand, or things that we think we understand? So just a close engagement with our understanding.
Yeah. Good. So in that vein, I'd love for you to give us a sense, where would someone start if they want to wade into this topic of epistemology? So what would be a book recommendation about your discipline for a church member or a layperson? What would be a kind of a middling book for college or seminary students, especially early in their education, that relates to things that you're passionate about, what you teach, what you write on, what you research? And then finally, a third book recommendation for new scholars, up and coming scholars who are wanting to do more advanced study in your area. So can you give me 3 book recommendations for each of those audiences?
Yes. So I think the way I would probably encourage someone to approach it is particularly a really interested church member wanting to get into epistemological types of questions, or maybe try to see what those problems would be, is a book by Alvin Plantinga. He is highly regarded among Christian philosophers in general, but especially within epistemology. But Plantinga has a book called Knowledge and Christian Belief,
Mhm.
which is a distillation really of his, and by distillation, I mean it's shorter and a little bit more accessible, of his sort of wider epistemological program. And so for someone really getting into that, I would recommend Knowledge and Christian Belief. And then my reasons will become clear as I continue my answer. For a student, I would recommend Plantinga's Warranted Christian Belief. So Knowledge and Christian Belief is a distillation really of warranted Christian belief.
Yeah.
And it's, where Knowledge and Christian Belief is shorter, Warranted Christian Belief is not short, but it is still accessible. And then for, I don't know if this is like the best way to go about it, but for a scholar, I would recommend the whole trilogy as my recommendation for getting a sense of the field. And the reason for that, so Plantinga has written these 3 books, Warrant, The Current Debate, Warrant and Proper Function, and Warranted Christian Belief. And the reason I would go with just Plantinga in general is his example of Christian scholarship and Christian philosophy in general is just really helpful to get a sense for how we can carefully but also charitably engage with a lot of ideas. So that's how I would probably go about it, because Plantinga is the one of the best entrance points for someone who wants to get a sense of how all of these things have been dealt with past several decades.
Yeah, Plantinga's very careful attention to excellence in his philosophical articulation and development. He's one of the few expressly Christian philosophers who has garnered the respect of non-Christian philosophers in the academy, that he's really looked up to as producing quality work and providing arguments that hold weight and are worth engaging with, even if someone doesn't believe in God. So he's a great example there. And then he also writes to academic audiences, and then also on down the road to more non-specialist audiences. So great.
He is a great place to start. And I have non-planting recommendations that sometimes I would give,
Sure.
but yes, he is just really exemplifies, I think, what Christian epistemology can be at its finest.
What are you reading right now? Everybody's got a summer reading list. So what are you reading for your own personal research or things that you're working on, but then also just for pleasure?
Yes. So right now I am just starting to go through work by a scholar named Frederick Beiser, who is well known, and that's another person I would point people to is Frederick Beiser. But he's an expert in really German idealism, and is one of the more popular philosophers, just for his clarity within that, which is a hard, German idealism is a hard thing to make clear.
Yeah.
But his most,
in like 2 sentences, what is German idealism? When did it develop? Why is it important?
mostly for our purposes, probably as sort of the tradition following Kant, and what Kant did with his own response to Hume, and the problems that Hume sort of awakened, and all of the
Pushing back on what we can know regarding the world outside of us, the world of ideas, and eventually what we can know about God.
Yes, what it is, what we can know about it, and what we should do about those things. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so, Beiser has a recent book out, and just engaging some thinkers and their sort of the transition from German idealism into analytic philosophy, and some of the big questions. We don't often point out the connections between idealism and analytic philosophy, but those are really significant questions. And so that's the big one that I'm looking at right now.
So similar question, what's analytic philosophy? If we briefly looked at German idealism, what's analytic philosophy and where would I see it at play today?
Yeah, well, analytic philosophy is really, in many ways, has become sort of the mainstream. We might call it a method. What analytic philosophy is has changed over time, in a sense, and so that's a hard question to answer. But presently, it's marked mostly by a method of rigor, and or an attempt at a particular type of rigor, and it's very common now within theological discussions and Christian philosophical theology, but a real intense focus on the structures of logic, and how the structures of logic are to play a role in argumentation itself, and being much more constrained by those things.
Yeah. We use modal logic all the time. If this is the case, then this must be the case. If kids don't sleep, then I know for certain that they're going to be crazy at the end of the day.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Last question, and I'll try to break this into 2 parts. So BibleMesh, we're very passionate about what we call the 3 greats: the Great Commandment to love God and love neighbor, the Great Commission to go into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then the great tradition, the deposit of the faith that's delivered once for all to the saints, that is summarized through the first several ecumenical councils and the creeds that the early church affirmed, but is really the articulation of what Orthodox Christianity holds to regarding things like the Trinity, who Christ is, his incarnation, etc. What I talk on this often, but I'm curious how you would answer this. What's the relationship between the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, and the Great Tradition for you? Second part of the question, how then does your discipline fit into that?
Yeah. So um, I would say for the first part, yeah, the viewing our calling to love, and viewing, um, yeah, our love towards God, but then also showing and sharing that love with those that we are seeing and living life with, I think is really informed by the Great Commission, in the sense of, the way that we are to love people predominantly is by um, contributing in some way, if we're able, uh, to deepening their understanding of God, and deepening the way that they treasure God. Um, and I think that's in a sense how we love God as well. We can love our neighbor that way and love God, um, in that way as well. And so, the great tradition, I think, fits in, um, really by, not only does it sort of inform the way that we might try to do that, the types of questions or the types of, um, problems or helps that we might wish to give to somebody, as we seek to serve them, but, just uh, the wealth of, um, experience, and the wealth of, um, circumstances that we can draw from, and a great
The treasury of knowledge and wisdom of the saints who've gone before.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at situations and contexts, often we easily, in the midst of difficulty, kind of zero in on, wow, this is a very, confined or unique situation that's, hard to connect in other places. But looking back throughout centuries and seeing how did churches or communities or, um, groups of believers, how did they handle a very similar type of situation, a very similar type of theological question, theological problem. And I think we can take that and those experiences, and serve one another, uh, more carefully with those. And I think epistemology, and theological, method, and these types of things, yeah, a lot of these challenges are not easy. A lot of these questions and the answers that we might wish to give, um, giving a sort of non-trivial type of response or answer to someone who is really wrestling with particular challenges is not always easy. And so having, resources or systems or methods that we can, um, make the most out of the types of help that we seek to give, the type of counsel or the type of ministry that we seek to provide, I think is very useful.
Good. Well, Shawn, thank you for your time. We're really excited to see the work that you do on our blog and the various other pieces that you will be writing for us as a research fellow in the areas of Christian philosophy, what it means to have knowledge, and especially knowledge of God, and then live the Christian life in response to that. So thank you, and look forward to hearing more from you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.